Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Nick and we want to welcome you to the online edition of The Gathering. This gathering group is just a collaboration between two churches, really. Zion Lutheran Church, which is an ELCA Lutheran church, and Pathways Church, which is a non-denominational independent church. These two churches have been working in partnership for several years now together, and this little thing we call The Gathering. It's the most generic name we could think of. We're really no longer either of those two churches. We're just kind of a gathering of people who come from one of those two churches and all sorts of other places, and we meet together each week in order to worship, to learn a little bit about God with one another, and really to learn about each other. And we meet in person every Sunday at 10 a.m., but we also furnish this opportunity to meet online so that if you aren't able to attend in person, you can get a chance to connect with us here in this space. So we want to say welcome to you today. If you want to get to know a little bit more about us, you can go to our website at everettgathering.com and you can read up about the partnership. I'd really direct your attention to the core values that are listed there. These two churches have different traditions and styles and ways of doing things, but we really found commonality around our core values, and so it's sort of what makes the whole thing tick. And if you're interested in learning about that, checking out our core values would probably be very helpful. Now, a good way to get to know who we are a little bit, we usually introduce ourselves. I mean, you can read a website and a whole bunch of stuff, but we think it's a little easier just to introduce ourselves with two words. So we use the words cautious and curious because we think it kind of encapsulates kind of the spirit or the feel of this group. We use the word cautious because many of us grew up in religious environments, and we've seen religion used in ways that's helpful, beneficial, positive, even inspiring. Religion can be beautiful, but we've also seen religion used in some ways that's not so beautiful. We've seen religion used in ways that's harmful, toxic, used in a way that's exclusionary, used as a way to exclude people. And so many of us find ourselves a little cautious about organized religion. Some would even go so far as to say skeptical of organized religion. Now, I know that's weird because we are a church, and so sort of by definition, we are an organized group of religious people. And so it sounds like an oxymoron, but we actually think that that's a pretty healthy tension. If we are going to be an organized group of religious people, then let's be a little cautious about organized religion in the process. Now, the other word we use to describe ourselves is the word curious. And by that, we mean we like to ask a lot of questions, but primarily what we would like to explain through that word is just our posture of humility, that we kind of approach everything with the mindset that we don't have the answers to everything. At best, we sort of have some convictions of things we think are true, but none of us is certain really about anything. And so we bring to every conversation a sense of humility and curiosity, that there's always more to learn about any given topic or any given way of thinking or believing. And so we try to practice what it means to be unusually curious about one another, because it's likely that there are some other people in life that we will meet that have had different experiences, different life experiences, that have learned different ways of thinking and believing, that probably have something to share with us that might be beneficial if only we're curious enough to learn it. And so that is sort of a default posture of this group as well. So if either of those two words, cautious or curious, is something that resonates with you, then this might be a group to check out a little further. Now, what we're going to be doing here is a miniaturized version of our in-person worship gatherings. In person, we do a lot of different things. We blend some formal elements and some informal elements. We sing multiple songs, but here in the online space, we're just going to sing one song. So our worship leader, Billy, is going to come on the screen. He's going to lead in a song. You're welcome to sing along if you'd like to. If you're in the car, just bopping along, that's fine. Or at home or wherever. You can sing along, or you can just let the music play, whatever. And then after that, we have a little video. It's a reading out of the Psalms, Psalm 138 today, which is part of the lectionary reading for today. And so that will play. You'll get a little chance to interact with Psalm 138. And then after that, I'm going to come back on the screen. And we're right now in the middle of a series through the story of Esther in the Old Testament. And so we're going to pick that up kind of in the middle of the story here today. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this story might have for us as people today, the questions that it might have us asking of ourselves. And then after that, we're going to wrap the whole thing up with communion. So in our in-person gatherings, we meet each week and we take communion together as a group. And in those moments, we supply the elements that you would need for that, the bread and the cup. But here in the online space, we do want to carve out an opportunity for you to participate in communion if you'd like. But if you want to do that, you'll need to get a couple of things on hand in order to participate. You'll need something for the bread, which could be a little piece of bread or a little cracker would be fine. And then you'll need something for the cup, which could be maybe a little juice or maybe some wine left over from last night's dinner. But if you want to get those couple items together and on hand, then you'll be all set for when we do communion. And then we're going to wrap the whole thing up with some announcements and send you on your way with a preview of what's coming next. Okay, that's pretty much it. Let's get right to it. Billy's going to lead us in a song, and then I'll see you back on the screen after the reading from Psalms. Okay, see you in a bit.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of a weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old me knew Jesus when I met you. Oh yeah, you called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing, now your love is the air that I breathe in. I have a future, my eyes were open, 'cause when you called my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day.
All right, that of course is Psalm 138. It's part of our lectionary reading for today, and it's a great psalm of deliverance and rescue. Have you ever heard of the story of Jim Lewis and Jim Springer? Are you familiar with those names? All right, probably not. You've probably never heard of Jim Lewis and Jim Springer, but you might remember their names after today. These two fellas are identical twins. They were separated, however, at birth. They were given up for adoption, adopted by separate families. They never met one another. They grew up in different environments in different places and lived separate lives, never knowing one another until the age of 39, where they were finally able to reconnect, learn of one another's existence, and meet one another. And as they got to know one another, they discovered that they had some, very strange and eerie similarities within their lives. Now, of course, they both looked the same because they were identical twins, but it turns out that their lives actually had a lot of similarities as well. First of all, they were both named James by their adoptive parents and went by the name of Jim. So these two adoptive families did not know one another and separately named each other the same name, which is like, what are the odds of that you would both be named the same name? But it doesn't stop there. It turns out that both of these men grew up and got married, and each of them married a woman named Linda. That's right, not only did they have the same name, but they also married a woman of the same name. Now, that alone is pretty freaky, pretty weird, and highly unusual. But it doesn't end there, because it turns out both men also were divorced. And then after divorce, they both got remarried. And when they remarried, they both married a woman with the same name again, the name Betty. What? What is happening here? How can this story even possibly be real? Well, it gets worse. They actually both even had children. They both had a son, and they each named their son James Allen. Not just the first name, but the second name the same also. Now, there was a slight spelling difference here. One of them was James Allen, A-L-L-A-N. The other one was James Allen, A-L-A-N. One L difference, but the same name. I mean, these guys' lives are starting to sound like a horror movie at this point. They're just so similar. They both drove the same make and model of car. They both smoked the same brand of cigarettes, Salem, by the way. They both had owned dogs that had the name Toy. They both had the same career. They were both sheriffs. And they both even vacationed often at the same town in Florida. This is so weird. I mean, how does this possibly happen? I mean, this just seems so random. And yet, is it random? I mean, is it just coincidence that these two guys grew up and lived virtually the same life? Or is there something else at play? What do you think? Is there such a thing as coincidence? I mean, are there some things that are random? They seem so random, but also seem so connected, even though they appear to be random? Are things really a coincidence? Is there really such a thing as chance in life? Now, that's what we're going to talk about today because we're doing a series. We're calling it the Esther Scroll, and we are looking at this strange story in the Old Testament that tells the story of, it's a fictional account. Most scholars believe it's a fictional story that somehow made its way into our Bible. And it turns out in our chapter today, there are a lot of strange coincidences that happen. Now, to recap, in case you've missed some of it, we met early on a villain named Haman. And Haman is a guy who got promoted by our very arrogant, wealthy, wicked king named Xerxes. He promoted this guy Haman into a position of power, maybe the greatest power in the kingdom besides the king himself. Now, Haman is thrilled with this, but there's one problem. There's one fellow named Mordecai, who is a Jew, who refuses to show honor to Mordecai, the honor that would be due to his position. So Haman is so angry over this that he wants to have Mordecai killed. But not just stopping there. He actually wants to wipe out not just Mordecai, but his entire race of people. He wants to commit genocide because one guy won't show him the respect he believes that he deserves. And so now an entire group of people, their life is threatened because of what has happened here. Now, last week we discovered that a new queen has come to power. Her name is Esther, and she is Jewish, although no one really knows that in the story. And she decided last week that she will work to change the king's mind about this. And she has approached the king and invited him to a party. And at the party, she said, you know what? Let me host another party tomorrow, and then I'll tell you my real request. And so that night, they go home in preparation for the next party. Haman has been invited to this party as well. And Haman goes home that night thrilled that he has been preferred by the king to be invited into this party of Esther. And he goes home still angry about Mordecai. And his family says, why don't you put a big old 75-foot pole up and have Mordecai impaled on it? And so Haman thinks this is a good idea and gets the pole ready. But on that very night, a coincidence occurs. Something very important happens. Now, Esther 6, verse 1. That night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. Now, here's our first coincidence of this chapter, and that is that the king just happens to have insomnia. The very night before the party where Esther will make her big request, and the very night that Haman has gone home and constructed a pole in order to have Mordecai impaled, is the very night that the king just happens to be laying awake and cannot fall asleep. He's got insomnia. Now, have you ever been there before? You really wanted to fall asleep, but you just can't get your brain to shut off. I have this problem sometimes. I just get kind of busy, and I'm thinking about my week coming up or the day coming up, and I'm thinking, okay, I got to get this done, and I got to get that done. And I'm laying there in bed, and I'm just thinking about all the things that I have to do, and I can't just get my brain to shut up so I can go to sleep. And then I start panicking because I'm thinking, I need to go to bed because I can't do any of this stuff unless I actually get some sleep first, right? And so maybe you've got that problem too. You just kind of wake up in the night, and you can't get back to sleep. Now, this king has this problem as well. But the king apparently has maybe had this problem before, and he has a way to cure it. And his thought is, if I can just have one of my staff members go read to me some of the chronicles, some of the records of my life and my accomplishments, maybe that will put me to sleep. So he has his staff go and find some minutes out of his kingdom and read them to him. Now, I will say this, minutes, are not the most exciting thing to read. If you ever go to a meeting and they take minutes, you're taking notes, and then sometimes at the next meeting, you got to read back the minutes first and approve them. And there's nothing like reading a set of minutes that can put an otherwise very alert human being into about the fourth stage of anesthesia. Just kind of knock you out. I mean, my dad once, I think, resigned off of several committees just because he couldn't stand sitting through the reading of all the minutes. And so Xerxes knows, if these minutes can't put his lights out, then nothing can. Now, the interesting part here is what minutes are chosen to be read. Now, according to the timeline of the story, Xerxes has been ruling for about 14 years. And so the steward who goes in search of the records has 14 years worth of minutes to choose from. All right, and this is the dominant political and military empire on the face of the globe at this time. So over those 14 years, there must have, been volumes of minutes and records of things that have happened in the kingdom. And there is a huge collection of material to choose from. And so someone on his staff goes to the bookshelf, and another coincidence happens because they just happened to pick the volume with an important account for our story today. Verse 2, it was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Now, we remember this from earlier in the story, that Mordecai found out about a plot to assassinate the king and alerted him to it, and the king was saved. Verse 3, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Well, nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. Now, we have another coincidence here. The staffer goes to the library and picks off of the shelf the very volume that mentions Mordecai. There's all of these records to choose from, and he just so happens to pick the one that tells the story of the time that Mordecai saved the king from assassination. He did the king a huge solid here and saved him from being killed. And the king says, oh yeah, I remember that. What was it that we did to thank him for this? And the attendants look around and they say, nothing, I guess. I don't think we ever honored him for it. Now, this is a strange coincidence as well, and highly unusual, because historians tell us, Herodotus in particular tells us, that Persian kings took it to be a very great point of honor in rewarding promptly those who had helped them. And in fact, the idea here that the king had not rewarded Mordecai for his assistance would reflect very poorly on him as a king. And so immediately he recognizes, we have to set this right. All right, I'm so thankful that you pulled that record because I never made this right, and we need to fix that immediately. But what do? How do you now, after this much time has passed, honor the man that saved your life? If only he had someone nearby that he could bounce some ideas off of. Well, verse 4. Then the king said, who's in the court? Who's nearby? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole that he had set up for him. Oh, bad timing, my friend. Verse 5, his attendants answered, well, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. Now, here is another strange coincidence. Just as the king is thinking about how to honor Mordecai, the only person around to bounce ideas off of is Haman. He just happens to be the only person nearby. And in the meantime, Haman is thinking about one thing, how to kill Mordecai, and Haman is on his way to the king to tell him about his plan to stick Mordecai up on a pole and impale him. But coincidentally, before he can get to the king wants to talk to him about honoring the very person he wants to kill. Verse 6. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? He thinks he's talking about him. Verse 7, so he answered the king, "Well, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. And let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" Oh, man. This section is so full of irony and coincidence. Xerxes asks Haman how to honor someone, and Xerxes thinks he has got to be talking about me. I mean, I've already been invited to these parties. I was the only person that invited them. The king just seems to love me. Esther seems to love me. He must be talking about me. But by coincidence, the king does not mention the name of Mordecai, who he actually intends to honor. And so Haman then thinks it has got to be me. And that's why he suggests this idea, because it's just the greatest honor he could think of. He says, give him your robe and your horse and parade him through the streets with your most noble prince leading the way, announcing what a great guy he is. Now, this suggestion here isn't something that Haman would obviously endorse for anyone else. Wear the king's robe, ride the king's horse. I mean, really, that is placing you on equal footing with the king. It would be a huge honor. But of course, Haman thinks it is going to be for him. And imagine his shock when the king announces who it is really for. Verse 10, "Go at once," the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." This was a great idea, Haman. Don't make sure you don't leave anything out. Do it exactly the way you said, but do it for Mordecai. Verse 11, so Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." That has got to hurt, doesn't it? The man that Haman wants to kill, his mortal enemy, is the one he has to lead through the streets as the leader of the parade, proclaiming what a great guy he is. And this is the point of literary reversal in the story of Esther. To this point, everything has been going Haman's way. But the winds now are beginning to change. And in our coincidence here, it is Haman himself who ends up having to lead the parade for his enemy. And imagine the shame he feels as he parades him around. I mean, it's got to feel like the worst day of his life. Well, it may even be the last day of his life, but we'll get there later. Verse 12, after Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has now started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Now the parade comes to an end, and Mordecai has been honored, but our main problem in the story has still not been solved. Our main problem in the story is not that Mordecai hasn't been honored enough. Our main problem in the story is that the Jewish people are about to be wiped out by an edict that says it is okay to kill any of the Jewish people on a certain appointed day. And that edict has not been rescinded. Mordecai got a parade, that's nice, but the edict has not been rescinded, and so the Jewish people are still in jeopardy. And so after the parade is over, Mordecai returns back to the king's gate, where he has been publicly protesting and mourning. And Haman isn't feeling all that good either. He goes home in disgrace and in grief. And when he gets home, he tells his family everything that has happened. Now, last chapter, he was bragging about how much the king loved him and how life was going so good. But here now, he is shamed. And in a final coincidence, Esther summons him just as his family pronounces his doom. Esther's banquet the next day is going to be his downfall. And he just happens to be ushered to that banquet as his family tells him, "You're cooked, my guy. Stick a fork in you. You are done." And it is very coincidental timing. Now, there's lots of coincidences in this chapter, and maybe you could say in the whole story, but particularly in this chapter, we just find all these sort of things happening together, like, wow, what are the odds of that happening, and this happening, and that happening? And I've mentioned a few here, but we could actually enumerate more. Some commentators suggest that there are 30 to 40 individual little coincidences in this chapter, and we're left wondering why. You see, this story is very entertaining. The story of Esther is an entertaining story. It's masterfully told. It's a beautiful story, and it's very entertaining. And I think that's actually part of its value, is to entertain. That's a part of its value, even in being in the Bible text. But it is also a text that, beyond entertaining us, presents a lot of questions for us as readers. It's a story that provokes us to think or to question. And personally, I think that is one of the main values of the Bible. Not to simply give us answers to everything, it doesn't, but to force us to ask questions. And the way that I read this story, there's a big question being asked in chapter 6. And that question is, how much of life is just chance or coincidence, and how much is providence? Now, I told you early on in this series that there's a lot of ways to read this story. There's a lot of different viewpoints, ways that you can approach the story, ways that you can read the story. And I think that's really helpful for us. I tried to encourage us early on that there's no one right way to read Esther. It's actually beneficial to look at it from different viewpoints, because maybe you prefer one view to the other, but there could be something to learn from each of them. And one way of reading the story, which is the more popular one, is that this is a story that shows that God is working behind the scenes. He's a hidden God. He's never mentioned in this story, but he's in the shadows hiding, and he is shaping everything that happens. And so all these little things that happen in this chapter, well, they aren't really coincidences. They're providence. It's God pulling strings behind the scenes. And maybe so. I mean, that is a valid way to read this, that God is involved and he's shaping how everything happens. And Jewish communities and Christian communities have often read this story that way. It's a valid way to read it. But many of you are probably familiar with that way of reading the story. So I'd like to suggest to you another way of reading the story that I think should probably get a voice as well. And that is the idea that Esther represents not a God pulling the strings behind the scene, but that Esther represents the dynamic of chance and human choice and sometimes even happenstance in the Bible. That sometimes things just happen, either good or bad. That sometimes they are the result of not God's choices, but human choices, and sometimes, well, maybe they're just coincidence. Now, that is an unusual kind of counter-testimony, if that in fact is what Esther is about, because often in the Bible, events and happenings are attributed to God's action. Things happen, why? Because God caused them to happen. But not in the story of Esther. In this story, God is neither mentioned nor referenced. In fact, things that happen are never directly attributed to God himself. And it's why many people call this the most secular book of the Bible. It's also why many people of faith don't like this book. Because it seems like God doesn't have a role. Other people's choices and random chance seem to have a role, but it seems like God doesn't have a role. And that's one way of understanding it, but some theologians would remind us that the possibility of chance and other people's choices doesn't mean that life is totally secular or without God. It simply means that life is rather complex. Things happen for different reasons, and not all of them are divine. Sometimes things happen in life because God wants them to. But other times, maybe things happen not because God wants them to, but because other free will agents want them to. And then maybe there's even other times where people just sometimes have insomnia. Sometimes the timing just works out and it doesn't appear to be anyone's choice or direction. Now, this doesn't mean that God is irrelevant. It just means that God doesn't have to script out everything in order to be God. This is really a picture of reality that is open rather than predetermined. Now, some would say, well, this just makes God out to be weak. I mean, if God's not the only one making decisions, then he's a rather weak God. But others would say, no, I think this makes God even more powerful. I mean, after all, anybody can follow a script, right? I mean, if you just got a blueprint of how everything is supposed to go, I mean, you just go along with it. Anybody can follow the script. But it would take a rather extraordinarily powerful God to navigate history while also dealing with the complexity of other free will agents' choices and the chaos and sometimes random occurrences that view of reality creates. And so some suggest that Esther's story might be the voice of that theological tradition in the Bible. That this story is making its case that there is a dimension to life that is unscripted and that God is not threatened at all by it because it's the way that he made it. Now, maybe that idea is a little bit trepidatious for some of us because we're often frightened by the idea of the unscripted because we're afraid that what it means is that nothing really matters. We feel a sort of safety in the voice that says everything happens for a reason, because if everything is in God's blueprint, then at least there's a reason for some of the things that I'm going through. That way of thinking ends up becoming a way for us to soothe ourselves. So unlike the king, we can sleep at night. But others would suggest that maybe there's a bad trade-off in that comfort. To accept the idea that everything is scripted is to accept that God scripts evil into the story as well as good. I mean, if everything is scripted in advance, then it isn't just the good parts, the good coincidences that lead us to the outcome that we want here in chapter 6, but it is also the bad things that have been scripted in as well. That means Xerxes and Haman and their authority and their power and the destruction that they wrought, that's been scripted too. And so maybe Esther isn't crediting God with these positive coincidences because it doesn't also want to blame God for why they're needed in the first place. Make sense? Now, there's one more piece to consider, and that is perhaps God seems absent here because the author doesn't want to blame God for what comes next. Now, Esther and Mordecai are going to make some choices as we read the rest of this story. They're going to make choices for how to deal with Xerxes and Haman. And they are political choices, they are powerful choices, and they are very violent choices. And in the end, we might discover the choices they make in response to Xerxes and Haman to be every bit as problematic as the choices Xerxes and Haman have made on their own. And this providential salvation of the Jewish people might end up in the end be seen as every bit as horrific as the danger they are facing before it. In fact, what they decide to do after we see it, well, we might have a hard time seeing them as true heroes of the story. And so maybe that is part of this story too, that this story is a bit of a caution to be careful not to force God to endorse your political actions. Now, I'm sure that has no relevance to today, right? You know it does, right? It's so popular today, as it has been throughout history, frankly, to say that your political views are God's political views. To use God as cover for whatever it is that you want to do. And when that happens, your enemies become God's enemies, and your actions become God's actions. And usually when this occurs, there are disastrous results where people end up doing all sorts of terrible, violent things in God's name. And we're going to see that that's what happens in Esther. And by the end of the story, well, we might be grateful that God's name never gets dragged into it. And in that way, this might be a warning for us to be cautious about doing the same. Now, we aren't the first people to read Esther, right? People have been reading this for 2,500 years. And when people read this story, they're always trying to decipher, where is God in the book, right? Because he's never mentioned, but he must be there, right? It's in the Bible, so he's behind the scenes somewhere. And people are always trying to determine, is this what God is working? Is this a providential? Was this just chance, or was this God actually doing something? And so people are always trying to find God in the story, where God is at work. But as interesting as that might be, I think it's probably a fool's errand. I think the author has hidden God intentionally in order to force us to ask some questions about ourselves. And rather than speculating on where God might be hiding in the little details of this story where he's never mentioned or referenced, if we're really looking to see what it looks like when God is at work, why don't we look to where God is most visible? And to see that, you have to leave the book of Esther. And where we find God's actions most visible is, well, it's at the cross. The cross is the revelation of God. It is God made visible. You say, how do we know God? It's through Jesus. Yes, that's true. But more specifically, God is made known by Jesus on the cross. The cross reveals how God works. And what we discover on the cross is that God is active in human history. It isn't just that humans are acting. Not everything is random chance. That God actually does act in human history. And when he acts, it is definitive and it is very clear. There is no hiding. There's no guessing. At the cross, God wants everyone to know what it looks like when he is at work. And what we discover is that God's action is always marked by love and self-sacrifice. When you see that, you can be sure that it is God at work. Now, the truth is, we don't know whether every event in life is chance or providence. There's probably some of both. But we're not able often to distinguish between the two. Some things are just unknowable for us, but not God. He is knowable. We know what it looks like when God is at work. We know for certain what it looks like when God is at work. And we know for certain that no matter why things happen, which we are sort of uncertain on, we know for certain that no matter why they happen, the way of God is the way of love and self-sacrifice, and that it will always win out. You want to know where God's at work today? You look for acts of love and care for others. And it's knowing that actually helps me sleep at night. I don't need to know why every event happens, but knowing that I can tell where God is at work through love and self-sacrifice, that helps me sleep at night. Even when I don't know what to make of everything happening around me, I know where to find God. We want to celebrate God's definitive action in history today as we go to communion. And so we're going to go to the communion table here. We're going to carve out a space for you to take communion if you would like. And we're celebrating God's definitive action, that he stepped into human history and acted in a way that was very clear. And he didn't erect a pole in order to impale his enemies on. Instead, he was the one who climbed up on the pole. And that God's action is always demonstrated through love and self-sacrifice. And as we go to this table in this remembrance, we're remembering God's pattern, Christ's pattern for us that was exhibited on the cross. We're grateful for it, and we're also once again pledging our lives to living in that same pattern. And so I want to invite you to the table today. Let me pray for us and we'll go to communion. Thank you, God, so much for today, and thank you for our opportunity to look at this very strange, bizarre story. We're not sure what to make of it sometimes, but thank you for the different perspectives of this story, which cause us to question and to think. Sometimes we read these stories and, well, we're not reading a bunch of answers, but we feel like the text is getting us to ask better questions that we think ultimately lead to you. And God, today we feel like you've led us to the cross. We are reminded that you are a God that is not hidden. You're a God who is not hiding in history, necessarily pulling strings behind the scene at all moments, but that we can clearly see where you have acted. We can clearly see where you are still acting today when anyone is showing love and care for others. It is your work happening among us. We remember your ultimate act of love at the cross today. We thank you for it. We are grateful for it. And we are inspired once again to follow in your way, Jesus. We love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, let's go to communion, and after communion, we'll wrap up with a couple announcements. All right, let's wrap up with some announcements here today. A couple things going on. First of all, we do meet in person at 10 a.m. on Sundays. We meet at the Zion Lutheran Church campus, which is just south of downtown Everett. It's an easy on-off the exit there at the 41st Street exit. And you are always welcome to join us here online, but also in person, and you get a chance to meet some other people there. It's a lovely community of people, very warm and welcoming crew, and so you're always invited to join us Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. in person. You can stay up to date with things that are happening by following us on the socials. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. You can find us at The Gathering Everett, and we post events and all sorts of announcements and stuff on there. It's a nice, easy way to keep up to date with things that are happening. Another way to keep up to date with information is to follow our email newsletter. We send that out periodically, and you can message us on Facebook with your name and email address if you would like to be added to the distribution list. You can also drop me a line. My email is on the screen there, and I'd be happy to add you to the distribution list as well. Student ministry is meeting tonight. Junior high and high school, they're meeting downstairs at 6 p.m., continuing their campfire series. And so if you're in junior high or high school, you are welcome to join them. We have a kids' play date that happens Wednesday mornings at 9:30 a.m. Here in the summertime, as the weather's nice, they've been meeting at Forest Park at 9:30 a.m. at the playground there. So if you've got little ones that need to kind of get out of the house and play and do something, you can meet up with our crew there Wednesdays at 9:30 a.m. And you don't have to RSVP or anything, just show up and you can join them there. This Friday, we have an outdoor game night coming up. We're going to be meeting at the church building, and we're going to be outside playing some cornhole and maybe croquet, bocce ball, badminton, all sorts of outdoor games. You can join us at 6:30 if you'd like. If you want to bring a snack to share, that's great. We'll have drinks there, and we'll just be kind of hanging out for a couple hours playing games and having fun, and you are invited to that. The following week is National Night Out. We're hosting one of them on Tuesday at our place there, and it's fun. The fire trucks come out, the police cars come out. Last year we had the mayor there. If you have little kids who want to climb all over a fire truck, it's a great event for that, and so you are welcome to join us there as well. And then finally, if you'd like to give, you can donate. You can do that online. There's a QR code on the screen, or you can just go to everettgathering.com/donate. You can set up a one-time gift or a recurring gift. And we want to thank you for those of you who have been donating there. We really, really, really appreciate it. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Next week is we'll continue on our Esther series, and it's a very bad day for our villain, Haman. He sort of gets his just desserts there, I suppose. So the villain goes down next week, and so we'll look at that in Esther chapter 7. It's supposed to be a beautiful week this week. Maybe we'll see you on Friday night. If not, enjoy the weather. Get out there. Enjoy the summertime in the Pacific Northwest. Just nothing beats it. So we hope that you have a blessed week, and we will catch up with you next time. Okay? Talk to you later. Bye.